This is Judaism Unbound, episode 71. What's Judaism for? Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofus.
And we're here after 3 really interesting and provocative interviews, and looking forward to getting into the discussion of them and to our discussion that sort of flows from them. Before we do, I just want to tell our listeners, as we always do in these kind of discussion episodes, that there are some ways that you can help this project of Judaism Unbound, and those ways are increasing. So this part is getting longer and longer for me to describe. But, of course, we really appreciate those of you who've made financial donations. That is so important to us. It's the only way that we can eat and continue this program and do all the things that we're looking forward to doing in the future. So if you'd like to make a donation, we would be so grateful. And the main way that you could do that is just head to our website, www.judaismunbound.com/donate, and it'll give you all kinds of different ways that you might be able to make a donation, ranging from a one-time donation to ongoing monthly donations. And there are all kinds of ways to do it. So we've tried to make that easy, and we are so grateful for those of you who've been willing to do that. Another way that you can help us is to head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating or a review, an enthusiastic review. Those are ways that help other listeners find our podcast when they're putting in search terms that are related, and we really appreciate those of you who have done that, and we really are grateful to those of you who will go and do that now. The last way that we're thinking of that you can really help us, which was recommended by a listener not too long ago, is that if you have skills or abilities or technical skills that you might be able to donate to Judaism Unbound in one way or another, please reach out to us and contact us and let us know, and we'll talk about it. But if you have skills like computer programming type things, graphic design, organizing, community organizing, logistical stuff, any kind of thing, Judaism Unbound at the moment is basically me and Lex, and we have some talents, but we have a lot of missed talents, a lot of lacking talents.
A lot of the missed talents.
Yeah, so, we really would be grateful to have an extended network of folks who are working with us on this project. We've already gotten some amazing help from people with ideas and with skills, and we're really grateful for those of you who might want to help in that way. So if you do, please reach out to us at dan@nextjewishfuture.org or lex@nextjewishfuture.org. So with that, let's jump into our conversation, Lex. Just as a starting point, you've been emailing me over the last few days, over the last week, about an idea of how to frame a certain kind of question. And I was wondering if you could share that with our listeners, and we could use that as a jumping off point for today's discussion.
Yeah, and the title sort of acts as a spoiler for the question that I've been using as a frame for Judaism. But the question that I think we could play around with, both us, Dan and Lex, and people in the world, is a little bit of a shift, because we've had a lot of folks on our show and elsewhere talk about the value of asking the why be Jewish question. And I agree with that. And I certainly think that why be Jewish is a far better and more open-ended question than sort of who is a Jew or what is Judaism. Asking why be Jewish is more expansive and allows for a conversation about what's Judaism actually contribute to the world, and how can we make sure that it continues to do that. But I've been thinking lately, because I'm not sure that why be Jewish is really the ultimate question that we're wrestling with. And what I actually thought about was the word for why in other languages. So I took French in high school. I've lost a lot of it, but in French, it's pourquoi. That's how you say why. And Spanish speakers know it's porque, same general thing. And we translate that as why, but it's literally pour, which means for, quoi, which means what. So it's for what. But I actually think that when we ask of Judaism, what is Judaism for? For what is Judaism? Pourquoi Judaism? We get a slightly different frame that is more helpful than why be Jewish. Because when you ask why be Jewish, why questions are answered with something starting with because. So why be Jewish? Well, because Judaism contributes this good thing to the world, and we want to make sure that continues to happen. Or because Judaism has some sort of inherent value, because Judaism allows for X. I don't know that those are the frames that we really most need right now. I think when you ask what is Judaism for, that's actually looking at that question that we've talked a lot about in terms of jobs to be done. That's just saying, what is the point of this? What does Judaism do? And I feel like when you ask what is Judaism for, your response has to revolve on something Judaism actually does, like a function of Judaism, and not something Judaism is. And I think that asking those verb kinds of questions, what does Judaism do, are a little bit more helpful than definitional questions of what Judaism is.
And just framing the question that way, I think, is a sort of product of our modern contemporary times, right? In the sense that I think that if you asked somebody, what is Judaism for 500 years ago, they would probably be very confused by the question, right? They would maybe only understand the question, why be Jewish? And the answer would be something along the lines of, that's what God commanded us to do, or that's the covenant that we made with God. And I guess that the question then becomes, right, yeah, as you said, what is it for? I mean, I think that Erwin Kula answered that by saying that it is for human flourishing, right? That if Judaism is not resulting in human flourishing, then it's not doing its job. Would you go beyond that? Do you have thoughts about what's it for?
I think human flourishing is pretty good. I'm not quite satisfied with it. Like, I want to get some like specifics. Like I kind of want to hone in a little bit more on, like, okay, what in particular has Judaism done, could Judaism do related to its past accomplishments, etc. And as I think about that, I actually flash back to a moment in our discussion with Rami Shapiro where I asked sort of, what is Judaism's Achilles heel? What isn't Judaism good at? And I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And I also think about the flip side, what is Judaism very good at? But human flourishing, sure, that's a project of most isms that we refer to as world religions that exist. I think that if we're going to identify what Judaism does in particular within the realm of human flourishing, we have a little bit of a tougher time, but I feel like it has something to do. I always mention the concept of rhythm. I really think that something Judaism builds itself on is a sense of rhythm, and its calendar is more expansive than a lot of other world traditions, and its daily practices are, and there's this sense that, you know, you've always got something coming up in a few days, in a few weeks, in a few months, and you've always got something that you just experienced a few days ago, a few weeks, a few months. And I think that rhythm piece really does bring something helpful to people's lives, both because it serves as like a memory mechanism. It's a way to help, this time of year is when we do X ritual practice associated with Judaism. I'm now sort of tuned into the fact that winter's ending and spring is coming, or whatever it might be. And I think that, you know, this has been played out in all sorts of places, and I'm not inventing this idea, but I think Judaism really is interested in the concept of deep debate and study. And I think that there is a huge value in bringing people into the world that cherish, you know, deep investigation of text and argument. And I think that the basic makeup of Judaism, both through the actual texts we've written and sort of the cultures we've produced, encourage that kind of thing. So those are some of my what fors, but I'm curious to hear yours too.
Yeah, well, and I'm also trying to puzzle out if what you're describing is the sort of what is it for, or sort of like, once we figure out what is it for, what does it have particular abilities to accomplish, you know? And there's got to be sort of a marriage between those, that if there's things that you want to accomplish, but like you're not good at that, right? You know, if I would like to be a baseball player, but I'm not good at hitting a baseball, it's not going to happen, right? I mean, that doesn't mean there will not be good baseball players.
You could be a pitcher.
It means that I won't be one. Well, yeah, right, in the National League. That, you know, my opportunities become very limited, you know. But just before we go there, I would add to what you said. I mean, to me, like the idea of a rhythm of the year, like that feels very correct, you know, in terms of something that Judaism is like particularly attuned to, particularly has a lot going on in that respect, whether it's the weekly cycle of Shabbat, the frequent holidays, etc. And then you also mentioned the sort of valuing of debate, right? The idea that Judaism is not, doesn't necessarily, you know, again, there's different, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. There are different times in history, et cetera. But I mean, we think we have a general sense that Judaism is not about dogma so much as about debate, discussion. It's about sort of principle, maybe. I would add to that as much as many of us and many Jews that I think are our listeners are not particularly inside of this, but I think that Judaism has been very much about the habitual, let's say, ritualized activities, as opposed to, let's say, a value-based system that doesn't ritualize those values and activities. So let me explain what I mean. I think that there's a lot of philosophies, a lot of religions, right, that basically say, here are our core principles of faith, here are our core beliefs. Now you go out and live your life in accordance with them. And I think that Judaism takes it a step further and says, and here is exactly the way that you should behave minute to minute, hour to hour, in order to live in accordance with them. And I think that there's a recognition there of something that I've found to be true of human living, of human nature, right? Which is that it's not enough to only have a value, because these times come in your life where, maybe you're busy doing something else and you say, well, I have that value, but I can't really implement it right now. There's a conflicting value and you don't know how to resolve them. Maybe you just don't actually know how to live that value out in the world. So I hope that's clear. The point that I'm making is that I think it's a real strength of Judaism that it has this built-in sort of commitment to ritualizing your values into a set of behaviors. The downside of that is that sometimes people forget what was the underlying value that these ritualized behaviors was meant to advance. And sometimes things might change in the world, or things might change in other ways that cause that ritualized approach that once served that value to no longer serve that value. And we may not have a mechanism to make a corrective there and to say, let's change the ritualized practice so that it actually does live up to that value again in our times. But I think that we've talked about what Judaism is good at. So then what is it trying to accomplish, or what should it be trying to accomplish?
I want to go back to that frame of human flourishing that Erwin Kula brought to the table, because I think there's a few different ways that people could hear that and how it could sort of be internalized. On one level, I hear human flourishing, and I get like the adjective meaningful. I like creating a world of people living meaningful existences. That's, I think, a part of human flourishing. And I think that's really key. I think that Judaism's, part of what Judaism is for, part of Judaism's role in the world is to add meaning to people's lives. And that's serving people on an individual level. But I also want to think about, people look at, tikkun olam and social justice. And I feel like for some folks, it still feels like that's sort of some interesting recent add-on to Jewish experience. And like, oh yeah, the young people are interested in tikkun olam. They're interested in like bettering the world with their Judaism. So maybe we should figure out ways to cater to that. Like, I really don't think that's what's happening here. I actually think that a core function of Judaism, a core what for of Judaism, as core as adding meaning, is serving the betterment of our world. If Judaism is not, Judaism's going to play at any given time a positive or a negative role. Like, I don't know that there's really much of a way for it to be entirely neutral. But if it is, God forbid, and I mean God forbid, if it is, God forbid, serving a negative role and creating injustice in the world on the whole, then I would say we should stop. Like, that would not be good. And so I really think that we have to be as interested in sort of how does Judaism, how does the stuff of our tradition, how do the sensibilities, to use Lippmann Camper's term, how do all of these elements of this ism we call Judaism actually serve justice in the world? And, then we got to actualize it. And that's why we have a lot of amazing Jewish social justice organizations. I feel like sometimes people think, oh, the synagogue is like the most Jewy of the organizations. And then maybe the Federation and some other, and then you've got people doing Jewish and immigration issues stuff, people doing Judaism and environmental issues, people doing Judaism and racial justice, all this really important work. And I think if we see that as like a super great perk that we added on to Judaism, then it becomes sort of extraneous and losable. And I don't think we can lose that. I think we have to see sort of our commitment to our broader world as a core function of Judaism, because I think it has been for maybe not for all of its history, but at many different eras.
Yeah. So, right. So I really very much agree with that. I also think, well, one thing that I think I heard from Shulem Deen, and I've certainly heard from other people who have left ultra-Orthodoxy or talking about ultra-Orthodoxy, is that one of the things that seems to be done well in the ultra-Orthodox world is to give people this sense of being part of a community that really cares for them. Not necessarily like the leaders of the community, but the other people. And that there's a sense of intimacy with the other people. Now, the question is that because it's a closed community, or is that because it's tapping into something very profound that's in Judaism that people who are not practicing that way aren't able to tap into? If it's the latter, then I would say, okay, now let's tease that out. Let's figure out what it is, if we can, right? Let's figure out what aspect of Judaism really is providing that feeling, and let's ask ourselves how to achieve that without having to be in a closed community. If it's being in a closed community, that raises a problem, right? Because I think that in our world, that is not tenable. And that's or it's tenable only if you want to live in a increasingly closed, small, high-walled community. We talked about that a little in the introduction to that episode, and we've talked about that a lot with B'nai Lappi, the idea of that option one, that if there's a threat to your story, one response is to just build higher and higher walls to keep that threat out. And it seems clear that that's one of the strategies, either conscious or unconscious, but that's been evolutionarily successful in a certain way for the ultra-Orthodox world, is to keep that threat out.
I'm thinking more about what you pose as a question in terms of is the strong sense of community that you can find in ultra-Orthodox and even many Orthodox contexts a product of the fact that it's closed off, or in some cases partially closed off from the world, or is it something that they've really bottled up and that we could learn from? And I think it's sort of both, but I don't want to undersell the extent that it really is something that they have mastered. I know a lot of, this is sheerly anecdotal, but I have a number of either close or not as close friends who I grew up with, same general Jewish environment that I was in. And they ended up becoming, what Orthodox world refers to as Baal Teshuva, becoming Orthodox. And there were commonalities among the kinds of people who did this. And once again, I'm not going to generalize to everyone, but in my experience, I observed that often the kinds of people who were becoming Orthodox were people who struggled socially, were fairly smart people, sometimes a little nerdy, sometimes not, but often smart, struggled socially, and all of a sudden they sort of tiptoed at one point or another into an Orthodox context and found that all of a sudden they were very quickly part of this collective that felt like you walk in and people care about you and you matter. Now, I want to emphasize, I think often that is more the case for men, guys who are able to participate in things in the ultra-Orthodox world that women can't. I don't know if there have been studies over whether more men become Orthodox. I wouldn't be surprised if more men are, given that participation in the community is easier for men. But I think that genuinely there are a number of occasions in a given day or week or month or year where you just automatically have a community of people to spend time with. I mean, at summer camp as a counselor, they teach you that the worst thing for campers, for homesickness, is downtime. If you don't have something to fill your time, then all of a sudden your mind flashes to the ways that you're not happy and that you miss people and whatever. And I don't think we really lose that so much. I think we fill our schedules with things, and so we don't have to deal with it as much. But having that loneliness that comes with sort of lacking a cycle of rituals and holidays, whatever, and then filling it very quickly and all of a sudden feeling like you're part of this big community. And also, maybe this is part of it too, having like a mission. Like the ultra-Orthodox world certainly feels like they're actually in the Christian sense, like a mission, like they are doing God's work, or trying to serve God is maybe a better way of putting it. It's empowering to feel like you're important enough that you have a divine mission, like, from Blues Brothers, we're on a mission from God. Like, I think that those factors really play a big role, and they do forge communities that are empowered because they share a purpose. And like Shulem Deen said, straightforwardly and kind of sadly, most conservative or reform synagogues, they might call themselves communities, but they're not really communities in the sense of like really close-knit group of people that spends a lot of time together. And they weren't even built, they're not even meant to be. They're serving a different set of purposes, and that's okay. But if you're looking for, a close-knit world of friends and fellow participants in a shared plan and a purpose, you're going to find that better in Orthodoxy than elsewhere.
Yeah, and it's interesting on the flip side where Shulem Deen talked about the idea that a lot of the people leaving ultra-Orthodoxy might be some of the more creative types whose needs, whose abilities are not the most comfortable fit there. So what I take from that, right, is that what ultra-Orthodoxy, for example, does well is give a sense of community, of belonging to everybody. And therefore, those who are particularly seeking belonging, right, if that's their primary objective, you said they may be socially awkward, but there's all sorts of reasons why people might really be seeking belonging as their primary drive, often will find that to be very, very much a good fit. And people who may be seeking an outlet for their creativity as their primary drive wouldn't. And the people from within, if they discover a way out, might very well be the ones to leave.
Yeah, I feel like we've covered a lot of good ground so far on the what's Judaism for question, but I also want to think about, and this came up a little bit with our conversation with Rebecca Sirbu, with the what are rabbis for question, because hopefully you'd think there should be a correlation between what Judaism for and what rabbis are doing. And, I'm not totally sure if that's the case right now or not. And we talked about some really interesting issues of authority as well with Rebecca Sirbu and how that relates to the rabbinate. And I bring that up because my instinct still, when I hear, folks should be discussing these issues, which we say all the time, by the way, and I think we should keep saying. My instinct when we say stuff like that is still,
we should be having, some warring op-eds by quote unquote leaders of the Jewish world, probably rabbis, maybe sociologists. Like that's still where like my brain goes. It goes to like a boardroom table and like a newspaper with op-eds and like the important people, quote unquote. And I'm pushing myself back on this because once again, that's my mental image. But I want to like push all of us to think about that because maybe this is a weird way to put it, but I really want to emphasize how rabbi is becoming like lower and lowercase. Capital R rabbi is less and less of a thing. I still think that there is, I mentioned I'm studying to be a rabbi. I think there are important reasons for folks to go and become rabbis, but I'm not convinced that the authority of a rabbi and that the role of a rabbi as the one that is able to have these important conversations or make legal decisions or whatever else is going to last or should last. We've been talking both prescriptively and descriptively. So I guess I'd love to hear, building off of our Rebecca Sirbu conversation,
from Rabbis Without Borders,
what do we do with rabbis? And if the what for of Judaism is on the table, how do we get the what for of rabbis on the table as well and allow everybody at that table, not just the quote unquote leaders?
It came up in our conversation with Rebecca Sirbu that I think the Jews are already without borders. And the problem is that we have bordered institutions and bordered people in leadership positions. And there's a mismatch in the conversation, right? They're not talking to each other and they're not speaking the same language. That doesn't mean they're mad at each other and they're not going to one another's places. They are. I mean, I think, what I've discovered in doing this work is like a lot of people that are going to synagogue every week are listening to this podcast and saying, you're really speaking my language. And so there's definitely, I think, a situation where there's a lot of unbordered Jews that are still participating in these organizations. Now, I would say to those organizations that I don't think that's going to last, that's declining each generation. And so but the hope of it is that the people are still, interested, whether they're coming to the institutions or not. To me, the question about rabbis and religion even is a modern question, right? When you really think about it, like, we have this conception of what a rabbi is. Rebecca is working against it, right? She's saying, half of our rabbis and Rabbis Without Borders don't have pulpits, as if that somehow should be really surprising and shocking to people, and it probably is. But I would say that, from the founding of Rabbinic Judaism in the first century until I don't know exactly when, but sometime, it was probably a course of 1,500 years or more, no rabbi really had a pulpit. That's not what a rabbi was. And to the extent that there were synagogues, it's not like the rabbi was the organizer of the synagogue. That was lay people. There were various lay people that kind of organized things. And the rabbi was, the teacher, the Jewish legal expert, the Jewish knowledge, was important in that community, but it wasn't like, we imagine it today. That's very much a modern, and certainly in America, an American conception that comes much more from rabbis having sort of taken on the styles of the Christian leaders of various kinds in America and elsewhere in the world than it is. It's a sort of natural, this is what rabbis have always been. And the same with religion. Like we can discuss, and I'd love to kind of get your take on what the word religion means, because I still really, really struggle with it, because for example, because to me, religion sort of feels like it's the God stuff, and it's the worshiping God stuff and all that, and it becomes sort of feels alien to me. I understand that that's not exactly what it means, but I think that that's what it means to a lot of people. And what's interesting is that in Judaism, there's no natural Hebrew word for religion. It comes from a Persian word, which which was sort of taken in modern Hebrew to mean religion, but in ancient Hebrew and in rabbinic Hebrew, there's no word for religion. It's an alien concept to Judaism in the way that we talk about it. And so many of the pieces that we use today to sort of talk about Judaism are using language that is actually not, and language and sort of concepts that are actually not native to Judaism. And so that doesn't mean that they can't become part of Judaism. Of course they can. But I think it's important for people to understand that these concepts that we have and that we feel are so sort of baked in are actually relatively modern. And so I'm interested in a sort of post-rabbinic, post-religious Judaism, and I don't know exactly what that means. We had Shoel Magid early on talking about American post-Judaism, but he didn't mean it was like something new after Judaism. He's using it in the term of like postmodernism, that it's sort of the next stage. And and that's kind of where my head is still at. I'm still struggling to define that. What would it look like to have a post-religion form of Judaism?
So the what is religion question could be not only its whole episode, it could be an entire new podcast. And I think that religion, as much as people, like you said, do associate it with God, I think as long as we're placing under the religion umbrella, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, some of the largest world traditions, thinking of it as if it is primarily a word to describe a set of isms relating to God in one way or another, I don't think is accurate. Now, do I think it's what people think in an American context because Christianity is sort of the dominant notion of religion, even oftentimes for people who are not Christian themselves? Yes, I do think that. And for that reason, I'm not convinced we need to hammer home the term religion as in order to try and like reshape it. I'm not convinced of that. But I do think, and I've said this before on the podcast, that as much as there are some people who it's a push away factor when they hear the word religion and they get images of God and they can't really wrestle with that and they don't want anything to do with those questions. I think as much as there are those people, there are a lot of folks out there that actually do want to meet
sort of big ticket needs of belonging, of meaning, of community, of identity, etc. And their instinct is to look to the set of things we call religions. Like, I think the reason why, whether it's Jews or Christians or others who are dissatisfied with their religions, go and look towards, Buddhism and Taoism and not some psychology or philosophy that is not really, like, I think it's because religion is associated with achieving those purposes effectively. So when people are dissatisfied with one religion they grew up with, they look for another religion. They don't look for philosophy or some other thing. Now, I wouldn't claim that that's the eternal reality of the world, and it may be that changes. But I think for the time being, it is beneficial to Judaism to position itself as a religion, whether it's like objectively the truth or not. I think it is, for the reasons I said before, that the term is so broad that I think we have to fit under it. But I think that if we lost that conception of religion, as much as it might help in some corners of the world, there are huge populations, both of Jews and others, that would make Judaism less interesting if we lost that idea of a religion.
Yeah, I get that. So that's a huge topic that I think is so important, right? Because you told the story when we were having our interview with Rebecca Sirbu that as soon as you announced to the world that you were enrolling in rabbinical school, you started to get all these questions and from people that were, that it was the same old you, but now that you were in rabbinical school, you were sort of on the road to becoming a rabbi, and somehow they ascribed that to something that made you a different kind of person in a positive way that they could go to with their questions. I mean, I don't know, you told the details, but
That's
interestingly,
it, yeah.
Yeah, so interestingly, just the other day, I got an email from a friend who was invited to a really cool event to sort of think about the future of Judaism where on the invitation it was signed by some people who were just signed their names, and some people it was signed Rabbi so-and-so. And she said to me, like, I just can't come to anything that was that has somebody using the title rabbi on the invitation. Right now, we didn't really get into the details of exactly why is it that she thinks that somebody who's using the term rabbi somehow has too big of an ego, and why do they have to put their title on there? I mean, it didn't have other people's titles on there, which I think is actually a sort of an important thing to talk about, because I do think that that's something that happens. And that, but that friend, kind of ascribes rabbi to a category of life, which, that friend I think calls religion, that they think has to do with God, etc. And they're just so profoundly against that, not interested in that they can't participate just because of that, right? Now, I'm not debating the wisdom of that, but that's a reality, right? That there are people that sort of have that degree of allergy. And I think that there's also a spectrum in between of people that have very thoughtful, not that these people on either of these sides are not thoughtful, but that, there's a whole spectrum of sort of thoughtful positions where you could sort of feel different ways about it. And I guess, like, for me, like, I'm wondering, is there a Judaism that can work for all of those people? Or is what we're talking about sort of schismatic in a certain way? And that, I could easily imagine a Judaism that positions itself as a religion and that becomes extremely attractive to non-Jews who grew up religious and no longer liked their Christian, dogmas or whatever, but we're still looking for a religion. We're not against religion. They just didn't believe certain things in Judaism. And I've seen this for many people coming from that kind of background, that Judaism actually is a very positive kind of religion for them, and they really want to join that. And you're right. If Judaism did not present itself as a religion, and if rabbis did not present themselves as sort of spiritual, clerical figures, those folks would not find Judaism to be interesting. But on the flip side, there are these other Jews and non-Jews, right, who want none of that. And the fact that Judaism sort of is talked about, calls itself a religion, and has all these categories is an extreme turnoff, and they will never join that. So one possibility is that this is schismatic, and we're actually talking about two potential or more forms of Judaism or post-Judaism that might emerge. The other possibility that I may naively be seeking, right, is something that transcends both of those categories. And that, I've thought about as like, we have world religions, like Christianity and Islam generally are thought of as world religions, right? Because they're not tied to a particular people. And, I'm thinking like, what would it look like to have a world post-religion? I don't mean a world that's post-religion. I mean a category of post-religion that is a world version of that, that transcends genetic, background. And that's where, to me, again, I may be very naive in this and I may be completely wrong, right? But that's some of what I'm like seeing that's attractive to me, perhaps not intended by him, but in Amichai Levi's language of God optional, right? Is that I'm looking for something that says, we can actually have religion as part, if you're interested in the Jewish religion, you can be part of this. And if you're interested in the Jewish post-religion or non-religion, you can be part of this. And what would our principles be? And like that's going back to our beginning point of, what is Judaism for, right? I could sort of imagine, and I sort of want to pursue the possibility that we can define what is Judaism for in a way that makes a pathway that is kind of what we think of as religious, a plausible pathway and a valued pathway, and also a non-religious or post-religious version of that. I should say non-religious because I think that the larger category is post-religious, right? But so it's sort of like religion optional. And I don't know, is that naive to think that that's something that's achievable? And so fundamentally what we should be thinking about is two versions of Judaism that might go their separate ways? Or do you think that something transcendent could be found?
Well, I don't know if it's naive or not. What I would say is if I thought that the idea of religion is something we needed to transcend, which once again I don't, but if I did, like my response wouldn't be to either work towards or think about a frame where we have two separate spheres that are polarized around whether they're a religion or not. That like elevates that centralizes the idea of religion even more, I think, when it is sort of the nucleus around which these two things are splitting. Like I continue to think that all of those would be religions. Like I think that ultimately for me
how do you reply to that friend of mine that just is sort of so turned off by the language?
I would respond compassionately and kindly, and I would indicate that I agree that the ways in which we use the rabbi title are often very silly. But ultimately, I would say, like, I don't think it makes very much sense to boycott an event based on the title. I would indicate my disagreement.
But going beyond that, that may be so with that particular event. But going beyond that, just the idea that it may not be so conscious for people. It may not be that they're boycotting, right? But that in some deep way, right, they are not. That they don't. You can make this explanation of what religion means, but like they don't know that. They're not. In tune with that. They're not thinking that way. And it means what it means, like language means what people think it means, right? So what do you do with that?
I think I would probably commit a little more to trying to move them. Like I think I would be less quick to accept that reality. And I would actually try to convince them that, there's a lot of danger in thinking something is quote unquote secular when it's actually not. Like, we can point to a lot of terrible trauma in history and like right now that comes as a result of people thinking that a particular society is sort of value neutral about religion, but actually it's very much built by one dominant narrative. I'm veering into some academic territory, but I think it's very important territory because if people believe that all religion means is the stuff around God and that sort of the rest of their notions about the world are not shaped by religion at all. They think that they themselves are a secular person or something like that. That means that they are not wrestling with the deep ways in which
ethno-religious realities have shaped the way they see the world. And that can play out dangerously and be pretty oppressive. So I think that's sort of why I care so deeply about not accepting the definition of religion as the stuff related to God, because I really don't see it as just like a definitional question. I think we are talking about, because we have this conception of freedom of religion, right? And we have this idea in America, which is one of the most religious countries in the world, that religion should be treated in a set of ways that are different from like other beliefs. There are like religious beliefs in a court of law are treated differently than beliefs that are not religious, and practices that are religious are treated differently. They're not always, but often. And so what that means to me is that if we treat religion as the set of things around God and largely Christian questions, we're going to be privileging Christianity, like in all of those contexts. And when people say that they're doing X, Y, or Z as part of their Islam or their Buddhism or their Judaism or something else, like people say that's not really religion because it's not about this God stuff, and it's not like that's not a belief, that's a practice. And that's why I want to like really, as much as we can, question that notion in the first place. I agree with you that ultimately it may not be a winning battle, and I may need to content myself with the fact that religion does connote God to people. But if that happens, I will then pivot to try and figure out how we, in other ways, sort of get to the root of some of these societal issues.
Look, I totally hear what you're saying in terms of the public policy dimension of it and the sort of academic definitional aspect of it. On a public policy standpoint, yeah, I totally get it. Like it's to the advantage of any group in America to define itself as a religious group from a public policy standpoint. But it brings us, back around to the question, I think, of what is it for? The idea that I'm sort of trying to sort through in my mind is that Judaism is made up of a lot of stuff, right? It's been around in different ways for 3,000 plus years, and it's accumulated a lot of stuff. There were a lot of smart people that were inventing and writing about that stuff. So a lot of it is really good. And I think that a lot of the frameworks that they developed are really good. A lot of the content that they developed are really good. In addition to that, because of things like founders' effects, where something becomes just sort of by happenstance what its founders, preferred or did. So, you imagine a little group of Jews in Eastern Europe founding a little community, and stuff will sort of become deeply immersed into that experience of being Jewish, not because it's better or worse, but because it happened to be the obsession of those founders, and it'll just sort of stay there, not because it's especially good or especially bad, but just because of accident, right? So I feel like somehow there's a need at this stage to sort that stuff out and to and to understand that it has to kind of be rewired, and that's what we've been talking about throughout this show. And then the questions are kind of like, what are our key principles that say, hey, this is even worth bothering to do, right? And I would say that, as I think about it at this vantage point, it's like, okay, the reason why I think this is worth bothering to do is, number one, do I think that Judaism has the capacity to do certain things that are worth doing, right? And I would say that, yes, when I look at this material, right, I see a concern for the world. I see a concern to have lives of human flourishing. I see a concern to have lives that are good, successful lives, right? And I think that's a valuable thing. I think people need that. I don't think that people are getting that too much elsewhere in their life. Number two, right, does Judaism have some technologies, some abilities, some special abilities to do some of these things really well? And I would say yes. I would say that among others, the three that we discussed, that Judaism is particularly good at being non-dogmatic. That doesn't mean it's always non-dogmatic, but that means it's especially good at creating a system for doing stuff that's not dogmatic and that allows openness to debate, that it's particularly good in terms of the rhythms of time, and that it's particularly good at turning values into habitual practice. And those three strike me as really effective technologies that are especially useful to people. And then the question becomes, okay, well, what is Judaism not good at, right? What is what are maybe other religions or other types of human activity better at than Judaism? And the question becomes, as we kind of modularize and then rewire Judaism in some new system that grows organically, what about imports from other practice, other religions and other ways of living? And how do we think about at what point what makes it Judaism, if that even matters?
Yeah, I'm like bummed that we've been going for a while with this episode because we've got like 7 more hours of stuff to talk through. Just earlier, you mentioned sort of rabbi and religion and grouped them and talked about sort of what we do with those terms. And for me, it's less clear that they're totally tied in the same question, because I'm ready to like bomb the term rabbi. I'm thinking of a guy a number of years back in Rhode Island who ran for lieutenant governor solely to abolish the lieutenant governor position. And so like as I'm in rabbinical school, like I'm ready to like totally start the process of transitioning to, I don't even think it's a new term. I think it's like a new set of terms. We could be branching out and splitting what rabbi means into certain kinds of functions. And like Zalman Schachter Shalomi started to do this a lot with ordaining people as like particular titles. Some of his were a little wonky. He had like geologist of the soul. This is their particular expertise and they are ordained as that, not necessarily as rabbi. And I would love to explore what that looks like. And I think it would better serve most Jewish communities, including even small communities, because often the response is, well, sure, maybe you could have all these specialized things in big cities and with large Jewish populations, but I actually think it would be much better for a small community to have, a rabbi. I'm calling them a rabbi because we don't have another term yet, but like to have a rabbi who is ordained and is especially talented at the learning aspects of Judaism, can lead text studies on everything, is a creative whiz at how to do that, can do it with all sorts of different mediums, can do it for every holiday of the year, can do it with like, they're the one that the other rabbis call on the phone and ask questions about when they want to do a particularly great text study. Like, I think it'd be better for a community to have them and then, bring in somebody to do something else here or there, and the community decides, we want to be excellent at this, and we're going to find the one that's this. And like, I think that might actually be a better thing in a lot of communities, especially as we have an interconnected world where digitally you can access more and more of this stuff, and you don't always need the person to be on your synagogue staff or in your immediate community to access it.
Yeah, and I think that all these elements I'm looking forward to discussing in the time ahead. I'm really excited about the next few weeks coming up on Judaism Unbound, where we have some really great thinkers. I'm sure it'll provoke many more such conversations.
Absolutely. And as we look towards the future and close out this episode, we want to call out to all of you to be in touch with us. We like to close all of our episodes with that. And there are a few ways for you to do that. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. Second, you can head to our website, JudaismUnbound.com. And last but not least, you can always hit us up via email at dan@nextjewishfuture.org and lex@nextjewishfuture.org. We also like to make a plug that if you're able to make a donation, you can do so at www.judaismunbound.com/donate with either a one-time gift or a monthly recurring donation. And also we don't always mention this, but for those who have remembered that we mentioned these podcast circles, we are getting folks together who are interested in gathering friends, family, etc. to talk about Judaism Unbound episodes. And if you think that that's something that you might want to do, just find, 3 friends or 10 synagogue members or whoever it is to connect around our podcast episodes on a monthly basis. Please be in touch with us, and we will look to set that up in the near future. So thanks so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.